Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to the fifth installment of Climbing the Rating Ladder. We are back today, and we are playing players in the 1600 to 1800 rating range in this video. And I'm opening with a open Sicilian, well, a Sicilian, I should say. It wasn't necessarily an open Sicilian at that point, against Basikovsky 1612. And this should be a good opportunity to get perhaps a mainline position. I'm going to play knight c6 here. This is the classical Sicilian, and we'll see how white responds. I don't have any recommendations as far as specific Sicilian lines to play because there's just a constellation of variations you could play yourself in this opening, this very rich opening. I'm going to play e5 here and attack that knight on d4. So you should just try to find an opening that suits your style. Some people like sharper stuff like the dragon or the knight orf. I myself have always tended towards a bit more positional and slower lines of the Sicilian, like the classical Sicilian, and also I think the Sicilian con is one variation that fits the bill. A little bit less theory, but it's such a good opening. It offers a little something for everyone. So what we're going to look for in players at the 1600 to 1800 rating range is just how they treat the strategic game differently, because I think that's the biggest difference you'll see. Players at this level have a better grasp of how chess should be played properly, and I think that's going to manifest itself in the games. You're going to see less random style positions and just games that can take many different directions, which is sort of the unpredictable nature you get at lower levels. So here we have opposite side castling, and the prescription in an opposite side castling position is usually a pawn storm, so a mutual pawn storm. And for that reason, I'm going to play a5 and look to attack on his queen side. And he's doing the same, g4. So I can play a4 and chase that knight from b3. I don't see a downside to doing that. In fact, it's going to drive their knight all the way back to a1 because these other squares are occupied. Yeah, so I can keep going if I want. I can play pawn to a3. I think I'll do that because now I'm shattering their queenside pawn structure. Almost certainly this knight on c3 will become weak. Yeah, he pushes the b pawn, so now this knight is only defended by the queen. Probably rook c8 makes sense, just lining up my rook with their king. They can push g5, but I can always run away with my knight like to h5 if I want to try to block the king side a little bit. Yeah, let's play rook c8. But elements that I think will be more important at this level, and I know to be more important at this level, are pawn structure, positional play, planning. Time management becomes more important, so I'm going to try not to let my clock run down like I have in the past. He plays h4, so looking to storm with the h-pawn as well. I can play knight b4 now, and if I play knight b4, I'm actually setting up the threat of rook takes c3, so I really like the look of that move. I'll do that. And also, if this knight moves, we're getting that pawn on a2 potentially. So let's see if he notices the threat of rook takes c3. Looks like he did not. Okay, so he just kept barreling ahead with his plan over on the king side. But I can take, and he's unable to recapture because of knight takes a2 check, forking the king and the queen. It is important when you sense that an opposite side castling position is brewing, or especially after it's already occurred, that you adjust your mindset and you start thinking about ways to attack your opponents. And if that's not possible, ways to defend your own king, because you're probably going to get attacked on the wing that you've castled. So he needed to spend a little bit more time there, I think, considering what I was up to after knight b4, because I played a move venturing into his half of the board, and he just didn't adjust for that. So he plays g5, attacking my knight. I could take on a2 with check, although after king to b1, he's attacking that knight, and also this knight is under attack. This rook is immune from capture, as we've established. So I could actually just move my knight back. I could also maybe play knight takes e4, f takes e4, rook takes e3, with the idea of queen takes e3, bishop takes g5. However, I don't just want to leap at the opportunity to play that. We always have to consider the lines that we're going to play carefully, especially if they're sharp lines. And if knight takes e4, f takes e4, rook takes e3, he can play this move queen takes b4. So I think, based on all of that, I should just move this knight back. And even though it's a defensive move, I am still up a piece and nothing really has changed. Moreover, I can maybe threaten rook takes e3 on the next move. He plays g6. So notice how I haven't moved any of these pawns yet. I really had stuff going on the queen side, so I didn't have to resort to moving them. But in not moving these pawns, it's taken White a long time to make contact with my pawn structure. So he's had to move the pawns all the way down to h5 and g6 in order to do that. And I still will not take. I'm actually going to play rook takes e3 now. Actually, you know what I'm going to... Whoa, I mouse slipped there. I do that sometimes. All right, well, that'll be interesting. I meant to put the rook back on c3 and play knight takes a2 check and attack his king. Great, John. Great. Yeah, definitely meant to play knight takes a2 check, king b1, and then rook takes e3. Although actually that would not have been good because of queen takes. My knight would be stranded. I should have just played rook takes e3. Okay, well, I'm going to try to come back from a little material deficit now. He takes... I'm not going to take that pawn because this pawn actually provides me nice shelter. It stops him from being able to assault me down the h-file. Now I'll have to play a little bit creatively. You know what I'm going to do after he takes my rook? I'm going to try to break in the center with d5. I'm just going to try to open it up. Because my knight on b4 will be attacked, can no longer be defended by anything. So I'm going to try to play d5 and open this up. So instead of having to convert a piece up position, I'm now looking at a material deficit. But this gives me an opportunity to talk about shifting your mindset. So when a good player makes a mistake in a position and they know it, what do they do? Do they despair about the mistake that they make? Do they say, woe is me, and start thinking about whether they're going to withdraw from the tournament or whether they're going to take out their anger on the next opponent they play? No, what they do is they immediately shift their mindset and they try to think about how to make the best of a bad situation. Okay, that's very important that you do that. It's a characteristic of all strong players. They don't go down easily. If they make a mistake, a grandmaster will simply assess the position objectively, acknowledge the mistake, and look at how they can best repair the damage. I don't think that comes as any secret. Any top player in any discipline will do that. They'll rally and try to make up for the fact that they've made a mistake, and they'll not make excuses for it. But I see many players just despairing and writing off a game instantly because they made a mistake. And like I said last time, as soon as you start reacting emotionally to what's occurring in a game, then errors are going to creep in. You're bound to make mistakes. Okay, so he's played rook g1, lining up on the g7 pawn. I don't see any immediate threat. He's ignored my d5 advance. I could play d4 and just see what he intends to do with that bishop. Could also play queen c7. I kind of like that move because it attacks the c2 pawn. Yeah, let's play queen c7. So maybe I can get this rook over to c8. It is possible White might try some tricks involving the g7 pawn, like say bishop h6, trying to get me to take it. So if bishop h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6, White would be threatening queen g7 mate. But they are kind of leaving the defense of c2. The knight does cover it. The thing is, though, if bishop h6, I don't even have to take their bishop. I could play bishop f6 myself. So he plays bishop g5, looking for a trade. So if I take, you could take with the queen and threaten mate, because once again, this pawn is covered. Here, I could play knight a2 check, king b1, knight c3 check, now that my queen is here supporting that. Probably first, though, I should play f6. Yeah, let's play f6, just to kick this bishop back. We'll save that knight a2, knight c3 idea for a moment, perhaps. But shifting your mindset and being able to play a position where you're winning brilliantly and one in which you're hopelessly lost, and approaching it with the same baseline, let's say, that same mental baseline, is extremely important, and that will benefit you at every level of your chess career. I kind of think of it like when you're looking at a position in your own game, you should be able to approach it like it's just a game you walk by in a tournament. You're playing in a tournament hall in a competition, and there's many other players around you. And when you get up for a stroll, you take a break from your game and you walk around, and you go look at a board. Unless it's like you're somehow invested in the game, like one of the players or some backstory about the game, you're just going to look at the position objectively from a an unbiased standpoint. And you won't prioritize looking at one move or another because of some emotional factor. You'll just do your best to figure out what's going on. So he takes. Taking with the bishop looks pretty good. It is defended by my knight here, and I still want to play knight a2 check and knight to c3, which I could do again. Knight a2 check, king b1, knight c3 check, king c1. I take here. No, I'm still going to do this. I think I keep all my threats. I think it's still going to be available. All right, so he plays bishop back to e3. This is still an option, and it looks like a good one. So yeah, let's give a check here. So king b1 is forced. He shouldn't waste any time on that move. Yeah, he should just play it like he did. Queen c3 is also possible, threatening mate on b2. Then he'd have to take my queen. Knight takes c3, king c1, knight takes d1, king takes d1. I have bishop takes f3 check at the end of that line. So it's either that or play knight c3 check, king c1, knight takes d1 immediately, which is also looking pretty good. I like the clarity that this line offers, though. So I'm going to do that. I see that I can win that f3 pawn at the end of the line, and I like that, because then h5 is weak, h7 is likely to fall in the endgame. I still have this very nice passed a pawn. So I'm playing for some simplifications. Not a bad thing to do if your equilibrium has been disturbed earlier because of a blunder. So just try to simplify the position a bit. So I'm happy. You should probably go back to c1. It'd be really nice to bring my bishop in and attack that knight in the corner. Also, I'd like to get my rook involved, like maybe bring it over to c8. Place king d2 instead. Let's just grab this pawn. Hanging pawn on h5. He can put the bishop on d3, but I have 3 connected pawns from the g file through the e file now, and I can start advancing them, like f5 if needed. Yeah, I'm up 2 pawns right now. Bishop c5 looks like a pretty good move to simplify as well. Maybe knight c5 in addition. Let's go knight c5. Supported by our bishop on e7. In choosing your openings, you should definitely try to gauge the amount of risk you're comfortable in accepting. If I were to categorize myself, I'm definitely on the risk-averse end of the spectrum. Not overly so, like I don't play super conservatively, but I like openings where my king is not getting attacked, where I have a clear plan. I don't just feel like I have to rely on pure calculation all the time. And in that sense, I don't think I'm a normal Sicilian player. Most players who play the Sicilian thrive in complicated positions. That's kind of the modus operandi for Sicilian players, and that's why a lot of people start playing that opening to begin with. Although, as I've said, the Sicilian offers a little for everyone, so it's hard to just categorize all Sicilian players as those who like tactics or calculation or whatnot. But if you find yourself more like me and you like calm positions and you don't want to have to deal with mutual attacks against kings all the times, then maybe openings like the Caro-Kann or e4, e5 as black, defending like in the Roy Lopez, those are more your type of openings. So king c3, this knight is still having a really hard time getting in the game. I could play g6 here and just ask his bishop what he wants to do. That's a pretty good move, so let's do it. He'll probably bring it back to h3 if I had to guess. And actually, then I have knight e4, which is mate, incidentally. Yeah, his king has nowhere to go. So our pawn on a3 takes away the b2 square, our rook is monitoring the d file, and our bishops do a great job of holding c4 and b4. It's a nice little checkmate. So let's go back and review this game for a moment. So I played the classical Sicilian. As I've said in a previous video, if an opening has a classical variation within it, it's probably not a bad idea to take a look at that. We're focused on playing fundamentally sound chess in this series, and classical variations are classical for a reason. It's probably been established long ago that it's a reasonable way of playing for one or both sides. and you might want to look into those lines because old masters and great analysts and decades of tournament practice has probably shown that it's a reliable line. And knight c6 is the classical variation. So f3. A big choice that Sicilian players face is often whether to put the pawn on e6 or e5. This is not true for some lines, like, for instance, the dragon. Very rarely would you put a pawn on e5. But in many structures, you do face this situation, whether to play e6 or e5. I play it both ways. I generally actually prefer to put the pawn on e6 because that covers all four of these squares along the fifth rank, f5, e5, d5, c5. Whereas e5, when that move is played, you do leave this glaring weakness on d5. So once this white knight moves, this square can no longer be defended by a black pawn. So black gains a bit more space by pushing e5 at the trade-off of giving white potential access to the d5 square. So let me reload this game and just try to highlight a couple points. But after e5, we both made some standard developing moves. So I played a5, and like I said, you should have a game plan as soon as the game starts to appear that it's going to go into an opposite side castling situation. Even before that, ideally. Like when I castle short, I should do that with the full knowledge that he very well might go long in the future, as he did in the game, and start attacking me. So what did I do? I just immediately began preparing counterplay against his king. So a5, he played g4. I kind of got the jump on him a little bit. It might make sense for him to consider a4 to stop me from pushing my a pawn down the board. I could try to put my knight into b4 then. It would be annoying for him to chase that knight away. As played, though, I like the game that I got because I feel like this pawn on a3 is always going to be pesky. He's already moved one pawn around his king, so his king position has been compromised to an extent. He said in the chat, why you give rook odds? Yeah, that was not intentional, Basikovsky, I assure you. Yeah, and here, you know, players at the 1600 to 1800 rating range will not be immune to blunders, and nobody is. I've said that many times throughout this series. But when I played knight b4, his sense of danger just failed him for a moment. He did not see the threat of rook takes c3. He probably saw that my knight was eyeing the a2 pawn, and he probably saw that it was defended by his knight, but I'm guessing he just didn't look any further than that. But when you're getting attacked and your opponents are playing aggressive moves into your half of the board especially, don't just take it for granted that your first sight observations about their threats are the totality of their threats. They might have other things that they're considering. So yeah, h5 was completely ignoring my play. And after rook takes c3, he's essentially losing the game. Because if queen takes c3, like I said, knight takes a2 check, forks the king and the queen. So he went g5. I played knight back to d7. I briefly considered this line, rook takes e3, queen takes e3. What was it? Knight takes... No, was it this line? No, I'm sorry. It was knight takes e4, f takes e4, then rook takes e3, hoping for queen takes e3, bishop takes g5 with a skewer. But the problem with that line is that he has queen takes b4. He does not have to take the rook on e3. And here, I still have a very nice position, but I'm no longer up a pure piece, a pure minor piece. So again, let me scroll back to that. Sorry, when I reload the game, it goes right back to the beginning. That's just something chess.com does. I don't have any control over that, unfortunately. So after g5, I just kept it simple, knight d7. And like I said, it's very nice for black that I haven't moved any of these pawns. That makes it harder for white to make contact with my pawn structure. They have to come all the way down the board, spend all these moves, h4, g4, h5, g5, before they can make contact. Whereas if I earlier, let's say I had gotten spooked by his pushing the pawns on the king side, and I had made a move like h6 or something. That makes it a lot easier for him to offer a pawn trade, a pawn break, to open the position, because he wants to open lines against my king. These pawns are my best defenders of my king. I want them to sit right where they are. I would only make a single pawn move if I knew it was for a particular purpose. Otherwise, I think it's just going to accelerate white's attack. So, yeah, he played g6, and then, yeah, I was thinking about rook takes e3, followed by knight takes a2, which would actually not have been good. But instead, I put the rook back on the square and immediately blundered with this. But this gave us a good opportunity to talk about mindset shifting. And even though I was down an exchange, which, if you don't know what that is, that's being down a rook for a minor piece. So your opponent has a rook, but you have an extra minor piece. It's being an exchange down. An exchange sacrifice is where you give up one of your rooks for one of your opponent's minor pieces. So even though I'm down the exchange, the position is still very sharp, and I succeeded in getting that material back with this fork situation that I set up. Yeah, and I've also talked about how when you spot a good idea, you want to try different permutations of that same idea or combination. And this is a good example right here, because after king b1, I could play knight c3 check and just go win the rook. But if I just play knight c3 right away, I'm missing the opportunity to play the move that I played, which is queen c3, which accomplishes a similar thing. He has to take it, otherwise he's going to get mate on b2. But in doing so, I simplify the game. I bring a bit more stability to the position, and I was able to gobble a couple pawns right after that, after which I'm up 2 pawns. So always try to maintain a level state of mind when you're playing. So rook takes b3, even though that was a gross blunder, I just laughed about it for a little bit and then got on with the game. There's no use in crying over such a move. Okay, I'm currently looking for another game. We'll see what we find. While we're waiting, I think you can consider playing d6 on move 2 in the Sicilian. That's very popular. But if you want, you can also look at e6 on move 2, or even knight c6, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. So Javier Mat is the second opponent. He opens with b4. Okay, so we're encountering an unusual opening. This is the Orangutan, or also known as the Sicilian opening. He plays b4 followed by bishop b2. I'm just going to play bishop f5. When you're facing an unusual opening, you can usually respond in 2 ways. You can try to fight fire with fire and play unusually in reply, so hoping to refute their opening or get the game into something truly crazy. Or you can adopt like a normal setup and just go about your business and essentially like shrug your shoulders at your opponent trying to throw you off with something you may not have seen before. And that's what I'm doing right here. I'm developing in a way that is familiar to me. I play this setup against other openings too. And I like it a lot for black because I played the bishop out to f5 already, and I played e6. So my light square bishop is not stuck inside the pawn chain. And yes, he's gained a little space on the queen side. He has a fianchettoed bishop. But overall, his position is nothing to write home about. So that's the approach I usually opt for when playing against unusual openings. I just try to develop normally, and I don't go out of my way to refute them unless I think there's a clear refutation. Okay, he plays bishop to d3. This is a little weird, blocking his d-pawn. I can take, and after queen takes, I can push e5. I like the look of that. Taking over the center. Even though I'm making another pawn move, I'm threatening e4, so he'll have to address that. He can play queen f5 and attack my e5 pawn again, but I have this move. Just reinforcing this guy. And I figure with the 2 central pawns, I'm looking quite good here. So here, I plan to castle, and if you want to pause your video, consider which way I should castle. If you were black, what would you do? Okay, I'm going to castle kingside. I like castling kingside because if I had castled queenside, he already has kind of a pre-made pawn storm, having pushed his C, B, and A pawns, whereas I wouldn't have anything going against his king. And I've already taken over the center, so I feel pretty good about that. So I don't see any reason to castle long and make the game truly wild. I'm happy with the position I have now. So d3. This pawn on c5 is a bit overextended, so I'm looking at playing b6 in order to attack it. I think rook e8's a pretty good move too. Overprotection of the e5 pawn. Decisions. I like b6 though. If b6 and he takes it, I can take with my a pawn. And then if, say, rook c1 attacking this undefended pawn on c6, I can push c5. Yeah, let's do that. I'll play b6. That's one problem in pushing your pawns into your opponent's side of the board early on, is often they can get overextended and they're liable to become undermined. So b6. He can play d4, looking to defend that pawn, but if he does that, he would block his bishop. So I'm going to take towards the center. Yep, he just develops, makes sense. Let's play rook fe8. Assign this rook to do something useful. I think protecting this pawn once again will be nice because it frees up one of my other pieces, my queen, my knight, or my bishop. Putting a rook on c1 makes a lot of sense for him, so he does it. I could play c5. c5 looks pretty good. Yeah, let's do that. If pawn takes, I could take with my pawn. I could also take with the knight, now that that knight is not needed to defend e5, but I think I'll take with the pawn and open the b file up. I like my pawn center, and it's reinforced nicely, so this should be good. Despite the unusual opening, my opponent has played solid so far. He hasn't committed any big blunders. I'm not threatening to take on b4 because my bishop on c7 is undefended behind this rook. He might consider playing e4 to try to strike back at my center. d4 would also be interesting, but I don't think he'll play d4 because, say I take with my e-pawn and then he recaptures with his e-pawn, I could play c4 then, and I would have a protected passed pawn on the c4 square. Also, his dark square bishop would be blocked out. I think he wants to keep this long diagonal open. So in that sense, e4 would make more sense as a strike against the center, either immediately or maybe after he captures on c5. I'm going to try to stick with the 5-5 time control. Last time I mixed in a couple shorter games towards the end, and it definitely was a bit more chaotic. So I think 5-5 is a pretty good time control. And he does play e4 as expected. Okay, so I think d4 is fine. I'm a little disappointed that I have to give up the c4 square, like he can now access that with his knight. But I am happy that this bishop is blocked out of the game. So it's currently staring at a row of black pawns. Two connected pawns is a great way to block out an enemy bishop. FYI, if you didn't know that. He slowed down a lot. I actually kind of like his time management. So you'll see higher rated players playing quickly in openings when they're comfortable with it, but they tend to slow down when the position becomes more complex, usually after castling, when a plan needs to be formulated for either side. And h4 seems a little random. I mean, they might be looking to move their queen and then get the knight into f5. That's a possibility. Again, I can't take on b4. I'd love to do that, but my bishop is hanging. Thinking of a few different moves. I could play my knight back to f8 and maybe look to play c takes b4 in the future. My queen is now monitoring that bishop. I could play g6, attacking their queen. I sort of like the knight f8 move, so I'm going to do it. Maybe I can put this knight on g6. They might be moving the knight in hopes of playing f4 at some point, but given that I can play e takes f4 in reply, I don't see that being an issue. Okay, so here, I can play c takes b4, a takes b4, queen takes b4. As I'd be attacking not only the bishop, but also the knight on d2. The other thing is he can take here. So c takes b4, a takes b4, queen takes b4. Let's say rook takes c7. And I can take on either b2 or d2. If I take on b2, then knight c4 comes with tempo, which would attack my queen and also this pawn. So maybe taking on d2 is decent, but then he has moves like bishop to c1. I'm not sure he sees that c takes b4 as a possibility, but it looks a bit unclear to me. I could play c takes b4, a takes b4, rook a2. That would be very interesting. Maybe that's a better way of playing. Well, let's play that. And I think almost certainly he'll recapture. I can still play queen takes b4 if I want, but I'm just not quite sold on that line. Queen takes b4, rook takes c7, queen takes d2. Ah, but then if the bishop moves, I do win d3. Okay, I didn't see initially that I would win d3. In that case, maybe it's fine. So I'm spending a little time because this is a forcing line and I can see it several moves in. That's the benefit of looking at forcing lines. They allow you to see the future in the most reliable way. So queen takes b4, rook takes c7, queen takes d2, attacking the bishop. His rook is on the 7th rank, so I'm a little worried that he might be able to attack f7 in some capacity, but I don't see that happening. So I think this is safe to play. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. I have a minute and a half to my opponent's 3 minutes and 10 seconds, roughly. But with so many pieces potentially attacking my king, I will have to tread carefully. A queen and knight combination around your king is always dangerous. So if he gets a chance to play something like queen to g5 and knight into f5, I could be hurting very quickly. But I noticed that my knight on f8 provides great defensive potential. Like if queen g5 right now, I know he probably wouldn't play that with a hanging bishop here, but if queen g5, I could always play knight e6, which is a great move to attack the queen and reinforce g7. It also defends c7 too. I suspect he will take on c7 because the alternatives don't look too good. It's a double attack. The only way to defend both pieces is rook to c2. That invites rook a2. Knight c4, see, I think that might run afoul of b5. Although, he might have in mind b5, bishop a3, rook takes a3, knight takes e3, queen takes a3, and then takes c7 at the end. That would be clever. Okay. Nice job if you saw that, Javier Met. So I'm just going to play this then. Creep a little bit closer with my queen. I still have the idea of b5, but I'm also looking at that d-pawn as well. I like this move. A creepy crawly move. Inch a little bit closer. Okay, so he's clearly trying to go knight f5 with that move. There's no doubt about it. He wouldn't just randomly put his queen in front of my king with no backup. So let's play our intended defensive move. Could also take d3, but knight f5 is a bit annoying. Maybe I can play knight g6 then. Maybe knight g6 is a decent way to defend. So let's calculate. My first instinct was knight e6, but I'm thinking queen takes d3 might be fine. Queen takes d3, knight f5, knight g6. Yeah, we're pretty solid there. There's also that b5 move too. Okay, I like this one. And with our 35 seconds, that seems straightforward. I also like the idea of kind of getting the queen closer back to my king in order to defend. I could also play knight e6 now. He has knight h6 check, but I can just sidestep king f8. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Famous last words, right? This is safe to do. No, but I think this is all right. Knight e6, and as I said, our knight is such a great defensive piece. When I dropped the knight back to f8, I was kind of reminded of the famous chess saying, knight on f8, there is no mate. So a knight around your king can be a valuable resource. But I think knight g6 or knight e6, as I've played here, both were fine. Just be trying to watch our time a little bit, but after his queen moves, almost certainly I'm going to collect this pawn on e4. Like, say, queen h4, I'm going to play queen takes e4. Okay, so he played that one. I'm just going to sidestep over here. So now his queen and his knight are under attack. He's hitting f7 with his knight, but his queen cannot join the assault on that square because queen h5 just drops the queen. So now he's going to have to move his queen. So something like queen h4. After which I'll probably just play queen takes e4. Because if I take on h6 trying to win a piece, he does have queen takes f6. So the easiest way to simplify now, I think, is this move. Offer a queen trade. Bishop a3 check. All right, we can just block with this. Could also take on a3, but nah, let's block this way. Safer. Reason why I was thinking about taking on a3 is after like knight takes a3, queen takes h4, we trade. Maybe then I could take. But actually, I think in that line, my bishop on c7 would have hung. Oh, no, actually it wouldn't have, because my knight on e6 was defending. So maybe I could have played rook takes a3. This should be fine, too. Knight's a little shaky on c5. It is pinned by the bishop, but I don't see how he can take advantage of that. If knight takes b6, we can always take with our bishop. Okay, so he's just retreating. Yeah, I'm just going to take. Our king's going to go for a little bit of a walk, but I think it's all right. We're up a piece. He maybe should try something like knight takes b6. Just because otherwise I'm going to be up material and almost certainly just winning soon. f4. Okay, let's play to simplify a little bit. Getting a little strange here. I'll just take. He's pinned along the file, so even though I'm opening up my king, I think I can always slip back to f8 if need be. He's low on time, too. Pretty volatile position. I mean, I wish I had a little bit more time, but I think given the material advantage, my king safety issue is not going to be a problem. I'm very interested to see, though, in this series if someone will beat me. Because I think it could happen. I think it definitely could happen. Especially, my plan is to make a 2000 to 2200 video. I'm going to recapture this way, so my rook on a8 isn't undefended. Let's just play simple. g3 is protected by my bishop. But you know, players in the 2000 to 2200 rating range can certainly beat me if I'm not playing my strongest game, my A game. So he said GG, so I'll just tell him good game back. Let's go back and have a look. So he played the Orangutan, b4. And I like this setup. This is a setup that I use against a lot of openings, too. I even use it against a kingside fianchetto. You play d5, and then you bring the light square bishop outside the pawn chain, and only then do you play e6. I mentioned in an earlier video in this series that a lot of people end up playing e6 with a pawn on d5 unnecessarily, and they lock in their bishop, and then they soon have problems figuring out how to develop that piece. So you don't want to do that voluntarily. It's good to just get the bishop outside the chain if possible. Often the deciding factor on whether you can get the bishop outside the chain is how much pressure there is on your d5 pawn. If he were attacking my d5 pawn like with his c4 pawn, a la a queen's gambit, let's say, maybe then I have to play e6 for reinforcement, or just time-wise I don't have the time to get bishop f5 in. But he's not pressuring my center whatsoever, so I can afford to develop in a way that I feel comfortable with. And I like this setup. I like how these pawns support d5. It's a pretty simple setup to play. He advanced c5. I dropped the bishop back to c7 because I think it'll be more effective on this diagonal. If I put the bishop back on e7, I'm just staring at this brick wall of pawns. So bishop c7, played queen b3. I was just trying to complete my development. And even though I made another pawn move, I think it's worth it because it comes with a threat, e4, and I'm also taking over the center. I have a nice pawn duo up here. He did play well, though. I think he did a good job of not making any huge mistake. I think when we had this tension on the c5 and the b4 squares, he perhaps misassessed it, especially once my queen was helping to defend the bishop, because now this c takes b4 move was possible, whereas previously a move ago with the knight on d7, I could not play that move because of rook takes c7. But after knight f8, it should click with him that my bishop is no longer under undefended. Maybe he saw that the queen was trying to defend and also take the b4 pawn, but maybe he just cut his calculations off there and didn't look at the implications of the queen taking and him also having weak pieces. I'll say it again, undefended pieces are a magnet for tactics. If you want to reduce tactical shots against your position, defend your pieces. Don't give your opponent anything to bite on. Yeah, and here, knight c4, this was kind of an interesting moment because I could play b5 here, trying to drive away his knight so I can go after that bishop. But I think he might have been planning this move, bishop a3. Attacking my queen, so counterattack. And if I take with my rook, and then knight takes a3, queen takes, the bishop on c7 is hanging. And from that sequence, I have lost the exchange. I've gone down a rook for a knight. So nice bit of tricky calculation there by him if he saw that. So instead, I just played this queen to d3 move. I could also maybe come back with my queen, like queen e7, although I guess he might play bishop a3 even in that case. I was just trying to get at a weak point, undefended pawn on d3. And it got a little dicey. He set up the queen-knight attack on g7, but this knight is such a great defender, coming to either g6 or e6, that I don't think my position was ever in too much danger. Bishop a3 check, decent try. I maybe could have played rook takes a3 here, actually. The way that would work is rook takes a3, and if knight takes a3, I can swap on h4. He has to take back and then take here. I saw that, but I thought that at the end of this line, my bishop would be hanging, but thanks to my great knight on e6, it is not. So I would just be up material at the end. I have 2 minor pieces against his rook, and I'm also up 3 pawns. So this would be essentially winning. As played, though, it transpired that he couldn't really do much with his pin. Even after I played knight to c5 to block the check here, he couldn't really accomplish a whole lot with this pin. I was a bit worried with my king out on e7, though, not going to lie. Maybe here, instead of queen h3, he should have played queen h4 and tried to pin me. Although I think queen h4, I can maybe even do the same thing, take. Probably the only way he's really going to hurt me here is if he can get at that knight on c5. If he can, like, undermine the b6 pawn, like, undermine the support for that, he's got a shot. But queen h3, we take. Yeah, take c5, and he just doesn't have enough in the tank here. He's running out of pieces to throw at me. Okay, I'm currently searching for another game, so hopefully we get that soon. I think I've said pretty much all I need to say on this one. This setup, as I said, can also be played against a king-side fianchetto. So if they start with, let's say, knight f3 on move 1, and you want to play d5 in response, there's other moves you can play too, like knight f6 or c5. But I like playing d5. And then if they play g3, I'll do something very similar. I'll play bishop f5, bishop g2, c6, castle, e6, and look to develop in a similar fashion. Knight f6, this knight coming to d7, the knights will be protecting each other. Bishop can come out to d6. Black has no problems with the bishop being stuck behind the pawn chain. There's quite a bit of theory in this line, but it's a nice way of proceeding. Okay, Machina 999 is our next opponent, 1713. He opens with e4. Let's go back to e5 in this game. So we've had one Sicilian, now I'm going back to e5. Knight f3, we'll play knight c6, our trusty defense. And bishop b5, we play a6 against that. I think you'd probably see more mainline Roy Lopez's at this level, so bishop a4. Nope, he takes on c6 though, so he's going to play the exchange variation. This player probably knows that knight takes e5 is not the best move. So he plays h3, kind of a defensive move. That stops bishop g4. It doesn't yet threaten knight takes e5 because I still will have queen d4 to regain the pawn. So what to do in reply? I could play knight f6. I could play bishop d6. I could play pawn f6. I think I'll play pawn f6. Normally, you're not supposed to move this pawn too early in the game. I've talked about that before. You weaken the diagonal leading towards your king. If you guys were little kids I have at chess camp, I would say the F pawn stands for forget about it. Just forget about moving that pawn. But I know most people watching this are a little bit older, and a lot of you know that you shouldn't move the F pawn too early. So he's offering a trade of queens. I will take him up on that. Then after knight takes d4, I'll play bishop d7. Not the greatest square in the world for the bishop. This structure, it resembles like the Berlin, which is also a variation of the Roy Lopez. But the way you want to think about this pawn structure is that black has the bishop pair, but I have some pawn structure damage in return, whereas white's structure is undisturbed. He hasn't created any pawn weaknesses. If we were to strip this position of all the pieces except for the kings and the pawns, black would be losing that pawn ending. Because my doubled c pawns would be discounted, white would have a pawn majority from the a file through the e file, and he'd be able to win that most of the time. So that should give you a hint about black's strategy is I don't want to exchange too many pieces. I'm not going to like back down from trades if they're offered, but I don't just want to blindly trade down because the long-term implications of that are negative for me. Here I'm going to castling queenside. I still have to develop my king side. He's also has some pieces to develop. He still has to catch up in that regard. The pace of play is going to be slower because the queens are off the board, so it's not a big deal that we're both taking our time bringing our pieces out. I could move this bishop out like to c5 or d6, but the way he developed that knight d2, makes me think that if bishop d6, he's kind of looking at playing knight c4. So I'm going to bring this knight into the game first before doing anything else. I might put it on g6 and then look to bring the bishop out later, possibly to e7. Pawn c5 is a move I can consider, trying to kick that knight away from the middle. Attack his knight, just drive it off. That would not be a bad move, because after c5, he can move his knight somewhere, like let's say back to b3, but I can play b6. I'm still going to proceed with this plan, though, just knight g6. Liberate our dark square bishop. Maybe I can play bishop d6 and then get my bishop into f4 later. Okay, now knight f3. But after knight f3, what if I play rook e8? So this is suddenly an undefended pawn. His knight was defending it there. By playing rook e8, I can force him right back to the defense of it. Could also play c5 as another move. Just try to drive that knight away once again. c5, knight b3, even c4 there is pretty tempting. Along with simply like b6. If rook e8, I think he will play knight back to d2, which is fine. I mean, it's nice to have induced that. Maybe I can play bishop d6. Let's do bishop d6. Although bishop d6, knight f5. All right, I'm going to play this move. I'm going to play c5. I just want to kick this knight. I'm very curious where they're going to put that piece. I feel like it's a little shaky on f5 because it's only defended by the pawn, which in turn can be maybe attacked by my rook e8. I would like to activate these pawns in the long run. I don't just want to sit there with my 4 versus his 3 indefinitely. I want to get my double pawns working for me, maybe even trade them off someday. Okay, so knight back here. Bishop b5 is a nice way to pin that knight, but bishop b5, he'll just play rook e1 and kind of sidestep that pressure. I think I'll just play bishop d6. Develop our remaining piece. Maybe I can bring this rook over to e8, and then this rook can stay on the d file. Even though the d file is kind of clogged up, it might be open in the future. I think the e file and the d file would be my natural destinations for my rooks. I'm happy with my position. Yeah, we'll go rook he8 now. Develop, hit that pawn on e4. We've succeeded in avoiding trades. There's a lot of pieces remaining on the board. Openings with an early queen trade, in my opinion, are kind of maligned by theory, but they're actually quite rich a lot of times. Just because the queens come off the board in a position does not mean the game is a dead draw. Far from it. So knight d2, so he's defending that pawn. Also, maybe he has the ability to play the knight into c4. I could play b5 and try to put a stop to that indefinitely. That leaves my c5 pawn a bit weak, though, is the only thing. I could play bishop e6, try to control the future of his knight. I think b5 should be okay, though. b5 maybe looking to play c4. Bishop c6 is a possibility. So attacking that pawn again. If I can get him to play f3, f5 might be a decent reply. So candidates here are bishop e6, bishop c6, maybe b5. All those moves. Hmm. The immediate f5 I'm a little less enthusiastic about because he does have bishop g5 as a reply. Although then I can play bishop e7, bishop takes e7, rook takes e7. I still have nice pressure against this pawn. Maybe that's decent. So f5, try to open the middle. What if f5, knight c4? He could do that as a counterattacking measure against d6. f5, knight c4, bishop back to e7 anyways. That holds everything. That holds c5. Okay, let's try this. So attack that pawn on e4. If he takes, we're just taking with our bishop. We've liquidated the center a little bit, but I don't mind making a couple pawn exchanges if it means opening diagonals for my bishops. So I like the look of that. Now his c pawn is under fire. He should address that. If he plays like c3 or c4, though, he would weaken the d3 square. So he might be hesitant to do that. Plays rook c1, kind of a defensive move. Bishop e5, he can play knight c4 again. Let's come here with our bishop. So attack that pawn on a2. Not sure I'm going to take that pawn, necessarily. Because he could play b3 and try to trap it. Knight e4 would be an interesting reply right here. Trying to attack d6 and c5. It might behoove me to play b6 and just make sure c5 is like always protected. I could have played that on the previous move. This move, I don't know. I don't really like his knight there. For him, I think that's a suboptimal square. One plan I might have now is after b6 playing a5 and then a4. You can see how pawn play is kind of a focus now because I have open lines for my pieces, but he has most everything covered. If you look at it, scan his position, there's not too many weak points. Whereas I definitely want to activate this majority and get that working. Pawn play and searching for pawn breaks is an important part of getting better, like appreciating the value of the pawns. You don't see it so much at lower levels. In the videos I made of the rating ranges up to 1,000 and 1,000 to 1,200, pawn play was something that didn't really crop up much because people were making so many errors with undefended pieces that it often just didn't get to that stage where pawn play would even matter. But at these higher levels, people handle their pieces better, and the pawn structure can often be a big determinant of the result of the game. Let's play bishop here. Let's centralize. If this knight moves, then b2 would fall. I'm offering a little trade of rooks. So he could play rook takes d8, rook takes d8, rook d1 if he wants to simplify. At that point, I could play bishop takes c3 if I wanted. And that would shatter his pawns rather nicely here. So I may consider doing that. So I have like a positional threat of taking and giving him a bad pawn structure. Those double isolated pawns that he would have to take on would be even worse than my doubled pawns. At least my c pawns are not isolated. Okay, bishop g5, so he's hitting that rook. I'll do this trade right here. See which way he takes back. He might take with the knight so as to avoid the bishop takes c3 scenario and keep that pawn on b2 defended too, because knight takes d1 would defend that. Nope, he's going to allow this though. Okay, so now I see that I can cash in on this exchange and mess up his structure. The pawn on c2 is a weakness. So is c3, but c2 is one I can immediately attack with bishop f5. So I like that move. And he'll probably have to assign his rook to defend it, like rook d2 or rook c1. And now I could give a check and force his king up to h2, but I'm not sure I'm really gaining much from that. I think I like just pawn h6 right here. And then after bishop e3, I can play my knight to e5. If you notice my pawn structure, I have every single pawn on a dark square except for this a pawn, which can come up to a5 potentially. That bodes well in playing against his dark square bishop. I like that situation. I don't want my pawns on opposite color, or on the opposite color of his bishop, because even though I would be avoiding those pawns, they would not be under attack. He would be seated like all the dark squares. Like if these were all in light squares, my dark squares would be very weak. So I'm trying to make up for the fact that I don't have a dark square bishop by putting those pawns on dark squares. Rook d5, he's letting the c2 pawn go with that move. He's hitting e5, but that's defended by my rook, so I don't see why I can't just take this. I'm not really worried about a sacrifice on c5. So we banked a pawn. Knight back to d2. This rook is looking a little trapped on its current square. If I play c6, he has rook d6 to escape, but then I have king up to c7. And actually, he's trapped, as far as I can tell. Yeah, because knight d2, he took away the d2 square. d3 is not safe, d4 is not safe, d7 and d8 are definitely not safe, nor can he take on e5, so he's having to play rook to d6. And then I have king c7, and laterally his rook has no safe square. His knight cannot come to e4, c4 then to support it, because I've got both of those squares covered. So he's going to get caught with his rook in the middle. Yeah, and I think he realizes it too. Otherwise, he would have made the move rook d6 right away, I don't think. I think he's looking for something that he won't be able to find here. I reviewed a book on my channel a couple months ago called Chess Structures by Grandmaster Mauricio Flores. It's a book by the publisher Quality Chess, and I very much like that book as far as pawn structure goes. And I think for class players and even players all the way up through my rating level too, it's just a great treasure trove of knowledge about pawn structures. And he examines various openings and the resulting structures. Kind of discusses a little bit of the theory in the openings, but kind of uses the openings as a starting point for discussing pawn structures. So there's chapters on like the French pawn structure, King's Indian pawn structure. He tries to cover and categorize all the major pawn structures. And that's something that makes sense to look at when you're rising up the rating ladder. I think once you get to about 1600 beyond, that would benefit you to start taking those things more seriously. He is just timing down right now. Doesn't look like he has anything. He's probably going to time out. Ooh, he moved just in time. But now we're hitting him with this move. Yeah, and I think that's it. So we won. Okay, so going back in this one, we had another Roy Lopez exchange variation, which we've seen a couple times, and we want to take with the d-pawn. He played h3. The best move here is castles. Castles threatens knight takes e5, so it's good to just whisk the king away to safety. After h3, I think I have a wide choice. Like I said, I don't even have to defend the pawn on e5 if I don't want to. I could play something like bishop d6 or maybe bishop c5 even. Yeah, because knight takes e5 would just backfire in view of queen d4. I played f6 because this is a reliable way of protecting that pawn. And I know, like on his next move, maybe after he castles, he would be threatening knight takes e5. So it's not a bad idea to protect it anyways. But most of the time, if you're playing a pawn, f-pawn move early in the game, whether you're white or black, you should have a very specific reason for it. I know the Bird and the Dutch players out there would disagree, but for improving players, I would mostly stay away from moving your f-pawn in the opening until you know what you're doing. And as I said, black should be aware of the implications of trades when you have a worse pawn structure. So it's almost like having a material deficit. You know, it's almost like I have to treat this as a pawn down position in terms of trades, because any trade I do brings white closer to a pawn endgame and potentially winning because of my crippled c-pawns. So I want to rely on my bishop pair. I want to rely on counterattacking, opening the position a little bit if possible for that bishop pair, activating my majority so that it's not just a lame majority in the endgame. Those are the things I'm focusing on here. And I think he got a little bit tangled with his knights. He didn't find like good circuits for his knights, and that really cost him in the long run in this one. Didn't really make like an outright blunder until the end of the game, but already allowing this bishop takes c3 capture hurt him a bit. I think he maybe should have played knight takes d1 as a capture instead of the rook takes d1 recapture. After h6, bishop e3, knight e5. If he hadn't played rook d5, I was planning on bringing the knight into c4 and attacking that rook anyways. And then he'd be forced to go to e2 if he wants to defend this pawn, and I love my play in that. I think my minor pieces would be excellently placed. The knight on c4 looks very good, attacking the bishop on e3. I could potentially take that bishop if I want to try to inflict further pawn structure damage. I was talking about having all these pawns on dark squares, so I might think about moving my a pawn up the board in an effort to further expand, utilize the majority. He's a long way from being able to use his 3 versus 2 majority. So it would have been interesting to see how it would have played out. But yeah, rook d5, bishop takes c2, and now he took away a key flight square for his rook, allowing me to trap it. So I am currently searching for another opponent, and we have Lane U Relos, 1744. I'm going to play d4. We've had some requests for d4. And as a hypothetical player moving up the rating ladder, by this point I might have a better idea of my preferences in chess. You know, I've played some games. I'm a little more battle-tested. Maybe I don't like the craziness of e4 openings. I'm sick of like trying to take apart the Sicilian every game. So in that case, you might start dabbling in some of the closed and semi-closed games. And d4 offers, as far as theoretical value, equally sound positions as e4. You're not sacrificing anything. You do have a bit more control over the course of the game, and I found that this is true at higher levels. d4 players tend to be able to better direct the game into the kind of channels they want, I've found. Whereas if you're an e4 player, you kind of have to be ready for a little bit of everything. If you think of the defenses that black has to e4, here I'm going to take, this is the Grunfeld variation we're playing, Grunfeld defense. Now I'm going to play e4, just establish 2 pawns in the center. But if you think of the range of defenses that are available against e4 on move 1, you've got e5, double king pawn, pretty solid but very mainstream. You got the Sicilian, where you have to be ready for everything. You've got uber solid stuff like the Caro-Kann, you know, or strategically interesting things like the French that can also be sharp at times. e4 players have to have a very flexible playing style, in my opinion. Whereas d4 players can be a bit more cautious and conservative and get away with it. They're not sacrificing soundness in doing so. Because sometimes e4 players, if they want to play cautious and conservative, they have to choose lines that are not at all dangerous for black. Okay, so this is a system I like against the Grunfeld defense, playing bishop c4 and then bringing the knight to e2. In bringing the knight to e2, you avoid potential problems with bishop g4. If the knight is developed to f3, which it often is in the Grunfeld, bishop g4 can sometimes be a timely way to counterattack. This pawn on d4 is sufficiently defended. I have the c3 pawn, the knight on e2, the queen on d4, on d1 backing it up. So here I can castle. I suspect that my opponent will play knight c6, and I will play bishop e3 in reply, reinforcing that pawn. I'm not going to advance that pawn because that would block my light square bishop. Moreover, I don't feel like I have to. I like my pawn duo. They control a bunch of squares. This is theory still. Yeah, bishop g4. So this indirectly attacks the center. I should play f3 to kick his bishop back. The difference in quality of openings is just stark. I mean, watch this video versus 2 videos ago, the 1200 to 1400 level. Huge difference in the knowledge of the opening for my opponents. Knight a5, this is a counterattacking move, still theory. This was featured in one of the early Karpov-Kasparov matches. They played this variation several times with Karpov as white. And in those games, Karpov was playing bishop takes f7 check, and after rook takes f7, then taking on g4. That wins a pawn for white, but white will have doubled pawns, and also black's knight can get into c4. So I'm just going to play a little more conservative. I'm going to drop the bishop back to d3. So respond to his attack pretty plainly. He takes. Let's take back. Yep, bishop e6. So here, we're still in theory once again. D5 would be a natural move, but if I play that, I have to be ready for bishop takes a1, which is also book. I'm going to play rook c1. This move hangs my a2 pawn, but I'm doing that deliberately. If he takes it, I can play queen a4, attacking his bishop and also kind of eyeing his knight. And this is a line where white gets some pretty decent compensation for the pawn. Bishop b3 or bishop e6 are moves here. I have a little bit of knowledge of this line. I've actually never played this line OTB, but I know a thing or two about it. So here I'm going to play queen b4. He was attacking my queen. His knight and bishop are a bit awkward now, and that provides some of my compensation. Yeah, b6. This guy really knows his stuff. Got to hand it to him. So here I can think about playing d5. I can think about playing bishop a6 to stop a rook from coming to c8. That's interesting as well. Benefit of playing d5 is I kind of threaten knight to d4. So I like the look of that. Downside is he might play queen d6 and offer a queen trade. But still, I think pawn to d5 is a pretty normal way of proceeding. So let's do that. Cuts off his bishop from ever retreating to the e6 square. I think bishop g5 was also possible too, trying to hit the e7 pawn with our queen and bishop. Yeah, and he plays that. I can maybe take and then play my bishop into a6, which stops him from playing rook c8. I am still down a pawn, but I feel like I have decent compensation. Okay, let's do this. Like I said, a player who clearly is up to date on his theory. This guy's not messing around. So bishop into a6, trying to stop his rook from coming to c8. Similar to the last game, I am a bit down now. Last game, it was just a pawn structure deficit. Here, it's a material deficit. I'm down a pawn. So I have to be very cautious about inviting exchanges. You know, if I just allow him to play a rook to c8 and start chopping material down the c-file, I might find myself very much regretting it in an endgame. f5, okay, so he's going after our center. I was thinking knight d4 would be good here. Knight d4, he takes, I take. Still looks pretty good, though. Yeah, let's do that. So we're kind of hitting that bishop on b3. Here I could play knight e6, but that doesn't seem quite right for some reason. It attacks the rook and the bishop. It's kind of an in-between move. Nah, I like this better. And if he takes f1, I'll just take with my king. Yeah, king takes f1. Strong play by my opponent. He's playing a good game so far. This line is such that it's possible I've already not played like the best theoretical move in the opening. Like maybe that d5 move wasn't so good for all I know. All right, he's going after this. I can play the bishop back to d3 to defend that. It's a little bit passive though. I no longer really need to protect c8. I can play rook c7. That's an aggressive move, but I think he can just take e4. He can probably get away with that capture. So rook c7, rook takes e4, rook g7 check. But my bishop is needed to defend the rook. I kind of don't like the look of that. Okay, let's just come here. If bishop here, can he play bishop c4? That would be pretty remarkable if so. And I can't go rook e1 to defend the pawn because he has bishop c4 check. So let me just calculate something here. Bishop b5, rook takes e4, rook c8 check. King f7, rook c7 check. He should be able to escape those checks. If bishop d3, I'm really worried he might play bishop c4. Idea, bishop takes c4, rook takes. Highly intriguing. I can't go bishop c8. He has bishop c4 check. Got to figure out something to do. All right, I'm going to play this. I don't know. It might be bad in view of bishop c4. I'm not sure. Kind of looks that way. Wasn't sure what else to do, though. Like I said, this guy's playing very well. Yeah, I think just bishop c4 in this position is looking excellent for him. If take, rook c8, or even rook takes e4. Maybe rook c7 was a better chance for me, but then rook takes e4 anyways. Yeah, he found it. Very, very strong. Okay, I'm just going to take. I'll try to make it difficult for him in this endgame, but yeah, I mean, he's going to be up a pawn or two, it looks like. Yep, rook takes there. All right, let's come here. I'm going to give a check on c8. He's probably going to win this pawn, though, on d5. All right, so once again in this video, I'm finding myself defending a bad position. You thought it was over after that rook takes b3 in the first game. Nope, not the case. Yeah, this should be a losing endgame. All right, let's take this guy. Rook takes d5, yep. Now I got to retreat my attacked bishop. I am attacking this pawn, but hard to say. If he moves it, maybe rook a6, then I can go after that b pawn. Looks pretty good. So he's not afraid of this. I guess he's going to try to advance the d or the b pawns, but I might as well grab a pawn and try to hope for the best. Maybe knight b3 would be smart. Try to get his knight in the game. So, unfortunate to be in this position against a player much lower rated than me. But like I've said, in chess, this sort of thing happens, and you have to be willing to adjust. Ready to play the position as the position demands. Okay, let's bring this rook back to attack the b pawn. Knight d4 makes good sense, just attacking e2. Okay, bishop c4, I'm thinking. Knight f5 looks like a good reply, though. That would threaten knight e3 check, forking my king and my bishop. Didn't have too many other good squares. Maybe bishop g4 would have been a bit better. Just really kind of running out of useful squares there. Rook f7 check. I think I kind of have to move this again. Knight e3, king e1. Okay. Let's come here. I could take b6, but I was in a pin there. And he had moves like knight e5 in reply. Didn't look good. All right, we'll come here. I think now it's looking pretty bleak. He can take g2 with check. He's threatening mate with rook b1, so we got to escape that somehow. Maybe this h-pawn provides a little bit of counterplay. I'll check. I'm going to try to go after that g-pawn. I think that provides my only realistic hope of getting back in this game. So let's attempt to go take that. He's found a nice spot for his knight now. Because now if I take, king f6 is unpleasant. Yeah, that would just fork my rook and my bishop. Yeah, I can't even take on h4 or take on g6 rather. I'm gonna give a check just to buy some time. Oh, he's threatening mate. Yeah, I can't do anything about that. Rook h2 mate. Okay, I'm gonna resign this game. So there you have it. My first loss in the Climbing the Ladder series. Yeah, very strong game by my opponent. I think I probably went wrong when I played d5 potentially, like d5 and then queen coming into d6. This endgame might not be that good for me. I mean, I'm down a pawn, and when he breaks up my pawn structure with f5, this started to look pretty good for him. I would say this level of play is suspicious for a 1772. Just the knowledge that he demonstrated and also the pretty effortless way he converted this position. And I really hate to bring this up, but we all know that online there's a lot of questionable players playing and using engine assistance. I don't want to say that this player is using it, but just based on this game, I'm suspicious. I won't really say anything more about that, but there is a online cheating epidemic. I guess we'll find out. We can judge for ourselves whether that happens. I don't want to implicate you, Lane, you Relos, but for 1772, this was an excellently played game. And if he was indeed just playing this on his own, as I hope he was, excellent game. He just beat me fair and square. But as far as the chess portion is concerned, I think this might be a line after d5 where I'm not coming out of this too well. So I'll just leave it at that. Let's play one more game. Like I said, though, even though when I was getting down a pawn, I was still looking for ways to try to save the game. This was an interesting psychological moment after rook e8, because I played bishop d3. I mean, he spotted that bishop c4 move, and I saw that could be played. So I probably should not have played bishop d3, but I just didn't see too many other good alternatives. If rook c7, there is rook takes e4, attacking my bishop, and then d5 is also falling. So something like rook c7, rook takes e4. If check here, king f8, and I mean, I've disturbed his king a little bit, but my bishop is under attack, which is in turn defending my rook. Maybe I could move my dark square bishop somewhere after rook takes e4. Like, it's not even too many safe squares, though, because if bishop f6, there's rook f4 check, forking the king and the bishop. So I'd have to probably retreat it somewhere like b2, maybe, or maybe even continue trying to check him. But I think his king is going to kind of snake its way over to the queen side, like so, something like this. If rook c8, king d7, something along those lines. And then I'm out of checks, and my bishop's going to have to move again soon. This is a good setup against the Grunfeld, though, if you're looking for a decent option. The Grunfeld is known for its fighting character, and it's a popular opening at the highest level because white has a hard time getting an advantage against it in theory, and black gets to play in kind of hyper-modern fashion, attack white's center from a distance, try to control the center with pieces rather than pawns necessarily, and it provides black a lot of winning chances. So many of the top players in the world rely on the Grunfeld in their repertoire. Yeah, and rook c1 is a theoretical move, like I was saying. d5 is another one, but if d5 is played here, you have to be ready for the minefield of theory that represents this line, bishop takes a1. And then white's supposed to play queen takes a1. Ideas for white are to attack on the dark squares, like bishop h6 is often a theme, attacking g7. Yeah, sometimes this bishop will move back, or sometimes black even plays f6, trying to block the queen. I believe if f6 is played here, white cannot take on e6 because of queen takes d3. Okay, black cat 11 is the final opponent. This will be our last game of this session. I'm going to play d4 once again. We'll see what we get out of this one. He says, thanks for playing. Awesome. I'm just going to tell him good luck. Yeah, and again, I really hate to bring up the whole potential cheating thing in the last game, but it's an unavoidable fact in playing online chess that people are using engines, and on some sites, it's kind of an epidemic, to be honest. Chess.com has very good cheat detection, so if my opponent was in fact using an engine, then that will be found out. And like I said, if not, I don't want to say definitively he is. I just think that that level of play he was exhibiting is something I would be suspicious about. Okay, this is a unique line. It's called the Snake Benoni, where black puts the bishop on d6. He's blocking his d-pawn, so it's a bit unusual. I'm just developing normally. I'm going to castle now. I like this pin that I have. He'll probably play bishop to b7. Hard to capitalize on this pin at the moment. Knight d2 to c4 is a tempting maneuver that I'm looking at. So knight d2, even though temporarily my queen would lose the defense of the d-pawn, he can't take it because he's under this pin. So I like the ability I have to play that and then move the knight up to c4. That's a common maneuver. So let's do that. Bishop takes h2 is sometimes a tactic you have to watch out for in positions like this. King takes h2, knight g4 check. But in doing that, he would lose 2 pieces and only gain 1 piece. So I think he'll be hesitant to go down that road. So h6, I could take on f6, and then after queen takes, I could jump the knight in. But probably better to maintain the pin. So there's bishop h4. Yeah, let's do that. Ooh, and g5. Okay, this player's getting aggressive in the center. So he breaks the pin, but at a cost, because now his king is weakened. d5, okay, so d5 was undefended, or sorry, weakly defended by me. I only had 1 piece on there, but his knight on a6 is being defended by the bishop, which in turn is needed to defend d5. So he's overloaded here. And if you don't see it already, you can pause your video and ask yourself how I can win a piece. Okay, so I can play this move, knight takes d5. And then after bishop takes d5, I'll play bishop takes a6. So when I played knight d2 way back then, that's something I had to keep in mind. I saw that knight on a6. I saw it was a little loose, and it was possible for me to play knight d2 even though my queen lost connection with the d-pawn temporarily. All right, so yeah, Black Cat just made a calculation mistake in grabbing there a bit prematurely. If this game goes short, I'll play one more after this. We'll make this an extra long video. It's Friday. You guys have the weekend to look forward to. So do I. Let's play one more after this. So we win a piece. Queen f6, kind of aggressive, looking at my pawn on b2. This bishop is loose on d5. I think I'm just going to play b3, though. Yeah. Simply ensure that queen takes b2 is never an issue. I got to watch out for my rook in the corner, and his queen is eyeing that rook, but of course he cannot take it right now. I've got my queen defending it. But good to put stuff on defended squares. That's been our mantra all series. Okay, bishop c6. I would like to trade the light square bishops. I think his bishop is a potentially strong piece. I'm thinking about moving my bishop all the way back to e2 and then trying to put it on f3. He could push his pawn to d5 in that case. I think also queen e2 is fine. Yeah, let's play queen e2. So if he plays d5, my plan there would just be bishop to b5, looking to trade. If ever he's able to coordinate like his queen and his bishop and attack on g2, I'll have to be a little concerned. Rook b8, what is he threatening with rook b8? If you want to try to figure that out, pause your video. Okay, I believe he's trying to play b5, and then my bishop would be cut off from retreat. So now I might want to take the opportunity just to play bishop b5 myself. So therefore he can't push the pawn. That move, he was kind of telegraphing his intentions. Like if you think about it logically, there's not too many reasons why he would play bishop to b8 there. So I kind of picked up on that. All right, so he's letting me take the d7 pawn. If I take it and his rook is attacked, he can play rook here, but I can bring the bishop back to b5. Then he could come down and pin me with queen b2, but I can parry that threat pretty easily. I'm not just going to take that pawn right away, though. I got to take a good look around and make sure it's safe to do it. And it looks to me that it's safe to take that pawn, so I'll do it. Bishop takes d7. Yeah, and he must have seen it right away, so he moved instantly, so I'll bring this back. a6. Looks like a pawn I can just take. So take b5, take again. I guess he can win 2 minors for a rook there. Maybe not, though. Bishop takes a6, b5, bishop takes b5. He could play rook takes d2 then. I would be giving 2 minors for a rook, but I win so many pawns out of that. Yeah, that's probably a pretty straightforward win. Because my fear is if I drop the bishop back to c4 or d3, like d3, that should signal some danger for us because we have 2 pieces lined up on the same file where his rook is. So if bishop d3, he could play queen d6, and he'd be attacking both those pieces. So I think taking is best. However, if I take, he has queen c6, threatening mate. Aha, that's interesting. And if bishop c4 in this position, b5 will be played. And then bishop d3, he again has that queen d6 move. Interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to take this. I know he has this queen c6 move. So I might have to give up my bishop. I am going to gain a few pawns out of this deal, though. I've won that d7 pawn. I won a6. a6 was a nice move, though, if he follows it up correctly. Yep, looks like he sees the idea. So he's threatening mate. Be a big blunder not to address this threat. So we're going to go here, and he'll probably play b5 now, trapping that piece. Okay, so now this bishop is lost. I should just take something for it. And what am I up? I'm up 2 pawns? Yeah, 2 pawns. So not the best technique by me, but still we're in a position I would expect to win most of the time. So I'll play rook fe1. This is just overprotection. So ensuring that pawn on e4 is well defended. Our knight is defended by our queen. c4 will be a nice square for our knight if we can bring it in there. Very clever counterattack, though. Once we're done, we'll go back and take a quick look at that one and see where or if I could improve. Okay, so he's trying to get me to take so he can, again, mate me on g2. We are not going to take. I see a couple ways I could proceed here. I'm going to play rook c1. And then if he takes, I can take with my knight, but I can also play queen c4 check, which is the move I really like. Okay, rook there. Getting out of the gaze of my queen on e2, but I do have knight c4 if I want. Attacking that rook with tempo. Queen c4 check is also a thing. I could play b4 here. That would be a clever little trap. b4, if he plays rook takes a2, I have queen c4 check, fork on the king and the rook. That might be the sneakiest way to play. Let's do that. So say here, take my pawn. Yeah. See, if you were black there, you just don't want to take that pawn right away. He moved too fast. That's kind of the mistake he made earlier when he took on d5. It's just, he got tunnel vision. He only saw the pawn, and I mean, he might have just looked very briefly at what he could do, or what I could do after rook takes a2, but queen c4 wasn't that hard to see. Yeah, now he's going to lose his rook. And after we take on a2, our knight will be defended as well. So we'll see where he places his king. I presume he'll move the king, because blocking on d5 doesn't really make any sense. That would be even worse than moving the king. So, yeah, he does. Okay, let's gather the rook. The only thing we have to watch now is this long diagonal. If he takes e4, I'll probably just take back with my knight, though. Continue to block that. If he had 2 moves, he would play f takes e4 and then e3 to open his queen to attack. So that's virtually the only threat he can create. Okay, let's just take here. Our knight is defended by our rook. I could also have taken on c5 right away, but I think this is just nicer. And now we have a lot of options, like rook takes c5 is possible. Queen b2 check is probably a good move. Queen a7 check looks like a good move. Yeah, let's go queen a7. So target is king. And if the king moves up to like the 6th rank, I'm thinking rook takes c5. Which looks excellent. Attack his queen. Yeah, and he's kind of running out of options against this now. I can always defend my knight with f3 if needed. That would be a simple way to defend. Bishop takes e4 might not even be that huge of a threat because I could always play f3 after that. I can try to set up like, let's say I play rook b5. That would set up the threat of rook b6. I kind of like that move. Let's do that. So just looking to move this rook over here, skewer him along the 6th rank. All right, so he's allowing this to happen. If bishop back to c6 to block, we have rook takes e6. So that wins. Yeah, and he resigned. Okay, so a couple loose piece errors by Black Cat 11, especially involving that d5 pawn early on. That was instructive right there. So when I played knight d2, right on this move, so that disrupts the connection between the queen and the d5 pawn, but he's unable to take it as proven in the game because his bishop is overloaded. Now it's trying to defend 2 things, and we capitalize. Kind of breezed through this opening. I was talking when the opening was played. Against c5, it is a good idea for white to play d5. And by the way, I definitely like systems with d4 and c4 if you're going to play d-pawn openings. Some people advocate like systems like the Torre or the London, systems like knight f3 and bishop f4, e3, and then bishop d3, knight bd2, almost regardless of what your opponents do. I think in terms of chess development, it's better to stay away from system openings. Openings that you just follow the same script for the first 10 moves are not conducive to learning, in my opinion, because it produces the same types of positions, so you're just going to get exposed to the same positions over and over again, not different ones where you can hopefully grow and learn from. And also, it's just a lot more interesting to play different lines. And d4, c4 has been established as basically the way to play d-pawn openings, and it makes sense to follow that. Okay, so I'm just going to tell him thanks for the game again. We're looking for one more. I promised one more game, so we're going to take a look. Who's playing? Oh, and later on in this game, as long as we have a moment, let's check that trap, because that was a very nice little trap. I got to admit, I thought he just blundered that d-pawn. Oh, we got a game here. I thought he blundered that d-pawn, but in fact, that a6 setup, and in conjunction with the queen coming to c6, was rather nice. All right, so we're going to have another d4, c4 line, potentially a Grunfeld or a King's Indian. Yep, another Grunfeld, okay. Let's play e4, just take over the center. Take. I'll play the same line as in that previous game. Let's see how this one turns out. 92. We're undeterred by our loss in the previous game. Okay, queen a5, so something new. Yeah, aggressive move. He's not threatening to take on c3 or anything. I could look to develop my dark square bishop. e3 would certainly be the normal square. I could also go to g5, but g5 is undefended. I'm a little worried that like a c takes d4 type move would expose the bishop to attack down that diagonal. So probably bishop e3 should just be played here. I guess on bishop g5 I could take e7, but then he has rook e8. Maybe. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and do that. We'll keep it simple. If knight c6, maybe rook c1. Our bishop here helps hold the a2 pawn, so that's fine. Queen back to c7. Seems like a waste of time. He is threatening to take on d4, so we have to realize what this move is up to. He's threatening to take on d4, and if I were to recapture, he would have queen take c4. But what I can do is I can play rook c1, and that indirectly defends the bishop, even though there's a pawn in the way, because if he takes take, then the rook will be assisting in the defense. Okay, now I'm just going to connect my rooks, play queen d2. I might play rook fd1 to further support the center. He plays e5. So I can take this pawn on c5. And this is a thing in this line. Like, you can take that pawn oftentimes, but then your pawn structure is kind of crippled. So you have to bear that in mind. I would have double isolated c-pawns, and I kind of lose some of the dynamic potential I have in the center. It's probably okay to grab it here. But I can also play d5 and establish a strong protected pass pawn. I'm going to do that. Even though it blocks this bishop, I have some experience in these positions, and I think they're rather nice for white if you know how to play them. He might have experience in this line too. Now that I have a pawn on d5, it would be great for black to try to bring that knight over to d6. That's like the best square he can hope for the knight. It's a blockading square. Knights belong in front of passed pawns to stop them. Okay, so b6, probably looking to enable that maneuver in the long run. Knight b7 to d6. I'm going to try to swap his dark squared bishop. And you might be wondering why I'm leaving myself with a bad bishop and maybe trading off my good one. But the answer is I want to try to attack his king. I would love to get at his king, and trading off the best defender of his king, that dark square bishop, is a good first step in doing that. Yeah, and he seems to know about this maneuver, so he's going about this plan. Now f4, so I'm attacking with this bishop pawn. That kind of interrupts his knight to d6 plan. Can't go about doing that as easily. Okay, bishop there. So now I can think about playing f5. And in doing so, maybe threaten to play f6. So f5, let's say bishop takes e2, f6 check, king back to h8, queen into h6. He has rook g8 to defend, but his king is looking awfully lonely over there. Yeah, let's do that. Knight g3 was another option if I wanted to avoid bishop takes e2, but I think the possibility of getting my pawn on f6 is pretty huge here. So I'm going to try that. King h8 has to be played now. If he goes king g8, queen h6 would just end the game immediately. Okay, so a line I would for certain want to look at now, and I am at the moment, is queen h6, rook g8, and then seeing if I can somehow get my rook up and over. But I don't see that I can do that right away, so I'm just going to play this capture and look to play queen h6 going forward. So he might be able to bring the knight back to e8 at an appropriate moment to defend. He is also hitting this pawn on e4. So let's say queen h6, rook g8, and then rook h3. My threat would actually be queen takes h7. That's hard to stop. Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of good ways to deal with that. I think that works. Queen h6, threatening mate. He could play knight e8, but then I would still play rook h3. Basically, I want to swing the rook up and assist in attacking on h7. So let's say queen h6, rook g8, rook h3. And if he takes e4, we get queen takes h7, king takes h7, rook h3 mate. He's caught in a column with that pawn on f6. That looks good. I don't see a defense for him. He could play that knight e8 move like I was saying, but okay, so here. In addition to queen takes h7, we're simply threatening rook h3 too. Yeah, knight e8, but now he's going to get mated along the h-file. So we get to finish with a nice little checkmate here. Yeah, and rook h3 coming. So he had the right strategic idea. It's just his king side situation was unmanageable. Once I got that pawn to f6, that's very dangerous for him. I think he probably should have kept that bishop back. Maybe after I played f4, maybe play a defensive move like f6 or maybe take, although I'm pretty happy with my center in that case. But in the opening, I think he kind of wasted a little bit of time playing queen a5 and then the queen back to c7. And we were able to develop in a natural way. We had a slight lead in development, established a pawn on d5. There's a lot of pawn tension going on right here. It's not essential that I push d5. I could have played this in a couple different ways. Like I said, there was the possibility of capturing and trying to hold the pawn. There's also the possibility of leaving the pawn tension as it is, maybe playing a reinforcing move like rook f1. But I like establishing the protected passed pawn here. So if this pawn were blocked, like say he had a pawn on d6, I might be less likely to do that just because my bishop is bad behind it. But when I'm also getting a protected passed pawn from this d5 move, I feel better about that. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed this edition of Climbing the Rating Ladder. So the caliber of play was noticeably higher in this one. I mean, no surprise as we're moving up the ratings, but in my opinion, you could see many things that were done differently. The level of opening knowledge was pretty striking. We had several opponents who knew quite a bit about the lines that I was playing. People were making less blunders. You still see there were blunders, like in that second to last game against Black Cat. He made 2 blunders. He fought back pretty well, but did make a couple blunders. Also, the very first game in the Sicilian, my opponent blundered rook takes c3. We talked about the importance of pawn structure and starting to appreciate pawn play. That becomes apparent at this level pretty quickly. And planning, too. I actually have to actively outplay these players, whereas previously, a lot of my opponents were just giving me games just based on the sheer amount of material they would blunder and the blatant disregard they would often have for their king safety. But players 1600 plus, you have to actually outplay them a lot of times, and they can play a complete game without making mistakes. I'm gonna check that one game against the player in the Grunfeld, not this Grunfeld game, the other Grunfeld game, because like I said, that player played extremely well. I will freely admit I went down in that game, but you know, it just bears saying that you know, playing online, you never really know who you're up against, and you know, I'll take something away chess-wise from that game, but I am keeping an eye on that opponent. So regardless, though, I think we got a lot of good things in for this session. Let me know if you have any comments. Leave them in the comments section. And I'll be back next time with the Climbing the Rating Ladder 1800 to 2000 edition. So thank you guys. Bye.